The first thing you notice is the hunger, not your hunger, theirs. It's late 1944 on a speck of coral in the middle of the Pacific. You're a Japanese infantryman sitting in a shallow foxhole, uniform hanging off your shoulders, belt pulled in 2 notches tighter than when you landed. The officers say a convoy is coming. They always say a convoy is coming. You look out at the black ocean. Somewhere out there, they tell you, are ships with food, ammunition, medicine, maybe even mail from home. Merchant ships escorted by destroyers slipping through the night, bringing Japan's lifeblood to this island. You listen. You hear the surf. You hear mosquitoes. You do not hear engines. Because hundreds of miles away in that same black water, another scene is playing out. A line of Japanese freighters runs dark toward the west. The escorts are tired. Their sonar is primitive. Their radar sets, if they even work, belong in a museum. Beneath them, sliding silently at periscope depth, an American submarine purrs on electric motors. The captain studies the convoy through the periscope, makes a quick set of calculations, and gives the order: Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4. Minutes later, the night sky to the west of your island pulses with orange light. Distant thumps roll across the waves. The convoy your officers promised is dying in the dark. You don't know it yet, but most of the food you were supposed to eat next month is sinking to the bottom of the ocean. And on the far side of the world, in a shipyard you will never see, another Liberty ship is sliding down the ways into the water. Japan is starving. America is still building. This is the story of how one country strangled itself by ignoring logistics, while the other turned steel, welding torches, and ugly duckling cargo ships into a weapon as deadly as any bomb. Armies don't run on courage. It's easy to think wars are decided by things that make good posters. Tanks, fighter planes, battleships with guns the size of trees. But underneath all that noise is an ugly, boring truth. Armies don't run on courage. They run on calories, fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. Every shell fired from a gun in New Guinea, every gallon of gasoline burned by a Zero over the Philippines, every bandage on a wounded soldier's arm. All of it spent time in the dark belly of a ship. World War II was, under all the hero stories, an industrial and logistical war. The country that could move the most stuff, the farthest, the fastest, and keep doing it, would win. America understood this early. Japan did not. To see how that played out, we have to visit 3 places. An American shipyard where Liberty ships are born the bridge of a Japanese freighter trying desperately to reach a hungry garrison, and the cramped control room of a U.S. submarine hunting in the dark. The war between them is mostly invisible, but it killed more ships than any duel between battleships ever did, building a weapon out of steel plates and time. Let's start in an American shipyard in 1942. It's loud. It smells of burnt metal, oil, and wet timber. Sparks rain down from scaffolding where welders in thick gloves and dark goggles crawl over half-finished hulls. Cranes swing prefabricated sections, huge steel blocks, through the air and lower them into place with surprising precision. On the side of one gray hull, stenciled in large white letters, are 2 simple words: Liberty Ship. The design is brutally practical, about 135 meters long. Single screw propeller, triple expansion steam engine pushing it to a not very impressive 11 knots. Dead weight, around 10,000 tons of cargo. Tanks, trucks, bombs, grain, locomotives, barrels of oil. It doesn't care. If it fits through the hatch, it rides. They're not built in the old way, plank by plank, rib by rib. They're built like cars, standardized. Sections prefabricated inland in factories, then shipped by rail to coastal yards where they're welded and bolted together. Riveted construction, the old craft is too slow, so they weld. Early welds crack in cold water. They fix that on the fly, adding crack arresters, changing steel composition, learning as they go. The point isn't perfection, the point is speed. The previous era measured shipbuilding in months. By 1943, the United States measures it in days from keel laying to launch. Not for every ship, but often enough to terrify its enemies. In total, 2,210 Liberty ships will be built. That's a new 10,000-ton cargo ship on average every day and a half for 4 years. Each one is a moving warehouse. Each one is a middle finger to every submarine captain who thought he could sink America into submission. Japan, an empire on a short leash. Now jump across the ocean and rewind a bit. Pre-war Japan is an island nation with big dreams and small resources. It has almost no oil-limited iron ore, limited coal and bauxite, 70+ million mouths to feed at home. So it looks outward. Korea, Manchuria, then farther south, the Dutch East Indies for oil, Malaya for rubber and tin, Indochina, the Philippines, China's coast, the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, dressed up in slogans enforced at gunpoint. Here's the catch. Those new territories are not next door. They're thousands of miles of ocean away. Everything Japan wants has to be loaded onto a ship, sailed through submarine-infested waters, and unloaded back in the home islands. And Japan starts the war with around 6 million gross tons of merchant shipping. Barely enough to handle its peacetime economy, let alone a sprawling empire at war. It needs more ships. It needs convoys. It needs air cover, escorts, sonar, radar, all the dull stuff. Japanese admirals know this in theory. On paper, they've read the same books everyone else did. But their hearts are somewhere else. They dream of Tsushima, the great battle in 1905 where the Japanese fleet annihilated the Russians in a decisive clash. They worship big gun duels, carrier strikes, and the decisive battle doctrine. They fund battleships and carriers. They starve convoy escorts and merchant ship construction. To make it worse, the Army and Navy can't agree on anything except that they hate each other. Each runs its own transport routes. Each demands more of an already inadequate merchant fleet. The result? Japan sails into a global industrial naval war with too few cargo ships, too few tankers, too few escorts, and no real plan to fix any of that at scale. It's like deciding to run a marathon with one lung. You can start, you just can't finish. Submarines, the scalpel in the dark, back to the Pacific now from a third point of view. December 1941. The U.S. Pacific Fleet is reeling. Battleships burn at Pearl Harbor. Aircraft carriers are suddenly the stars. But down in the shadows, tied up at piers and sitting quietly in bases like Pearl Harbor, Fremantle, and Brisbane, is a force that hasn't had its moment yet. The U.S. submarine fleet. At first, it performs badly. The torpedoes are defective. They run too deep. Their magnetic exploders fail. Sometimes they hit and don't detonate. Patrols come back empty-handed. But American industry is good not just at building things, but at fixing things. By mid-1943, the torpedo problems have been largely solved. Radars are better. Code breaking gives submarine captains clues about convoy routes. Timid skippers are quietly removed. Aggressive ones are given command and told simply, sink everything that flies the rising sun. Now the invisible war begins in earnest. Convoy TA, doesn't matter, it's dead. Let's ride along on one particular night. We're aboard a Japanese tanker somewhere between Borneo and Japan, 1944. The ship is loaded deep with crude oil. No oil, no planes. No oil, no destroyers, no carriers. On the bridge, the captain watches flickering, unreliable radar. He has one escort, an old destroyer with tired boilers and a sonar set that gives more false contacts than real ones. The convoy isn't even big enough to feel like a convoy. It's more like a small line of victims waiting their turn. The crew is nervous. They've heard stories. Whole convoys wiped out. ships vanishing in the night with barely a signal. They're running dark, no lights, zigzagging on a pattern some staff officer drew up months ago. What they don't know is that below them, a U.S. submarine has been tracking their position for hours using radar, sound, and a healthy dose of guesswork. In the control room of that submarine, cramped and lit by red lights, the captain hunches over a plotting table. Pencil marks show the convoy's last known bearings. Range, 2,500 yards, the exec says quietly. Angle on the bow, starboard 40, speed, 8 knots. The captain lifts the periscope again. Green-tinted ocean glows around him. He sees the tanker, a dark bulk against a slightly less dark horizon. He knows what's in her tanks. He knows what that fuel will do if it safely reaches Japan. He doesn't see the faces. He sees the silhouette, the tonnage, the target. Tubes 1 through 4, he says. Set depth 8 feet. Spread. He calls the spread. The torpedo men in the bow room work quickly, hands practiced. Green lights come on. Open outer doors. A faint hiss. Fire 1. The boat kicks. Fire 2. Fire 3. Fire 4. The 4 torpedoes streak out, leaving brief trails of bubbles before the dark swallows them. Now the worst part, waiting. On the tanker, the captain doesn't know yet that his fate has already left its tubes. The waves slap against the hull. The escort destroyer plods along, sonar pinging. Down in the sub, men hold their breath. 30 seconds to impact. Now 20. Now 10. On the bridge of the tanker, a young seaman glances over the side and frowns. For a split second, he thinks he sees something. A white streak under the water. He opens his mouth to shout. He never finishes the word. The first torpedo hits just aft of midships. Steel buckles. Oil and water and fire burst outward. The shockwave throws men off their feet. The second torpedo slams into the bow. The ship groans like a wounded animal. Lights go out. Someone in the engine room sees a wall of flame rush toward him and doesn't see anything after that. The sub's crew hears the muffled roar through the hull and erupts into brief, tight applause. Another tanker gone. Another 100,000 barrels of oil that will never see a Japanese refinery. Points scored in a game that by 1944 is no longer a game. It's an execution, the curve that tells the whole war. If you draw a graph of Japanese merchant tonnage from 1941 to 1945, it tells a perfect tragedy. The line starts around 6 million tons. It bumps up a little in 1942 and 1943 as captured ships and new construction add a few million more. Then the line breaks, heading down, fast. By late 1944, submarines, bombers, and mines are sinking Japanese ships faster than Japan can build or capture them. Much faster. The total effective tonnage crashes below what economic planners had already said was the bare minimum to keep the war machine and the home front running. You don't need to know the exact numbers, just imagine this. You have 10 trucks to supply a city. People tell you, no, if you ever go below 8, people will start to starve. You somehow manage to add 2 more for a while, so you have 12. Then enemy bombers start blowing up your trucks faster than you can replace them. 11, 9, 7, 5, 3. At some point, it doesn't matter how brave the drivers are, there is simply not enough steel moving on the roads to keep people alive. That's Japan's merchant fleet in 1944, the Liberty ship that just won't sink. Strategically, now flip that graph. Draw American shipping capacity from 1940 to 1945. It's the opposite picture. The line starts modestly, then shoots up like a rocket. Liberty ships are only part of it. There are also Victory ships, faster successors, T-2 tankers, landing ships for tanks and troops, specialized transports. But the Liberty is the symbol, over 2,700 hulls, each one with roughly 27 officers and men in her crew, plus a Navy armed guard detachment on her guns. They cross the Atlantic carrying tanks and grain to Britain. They crossed the Indian Ocean with fuel and bombs for the British and Americans in Burma and India. They crossed the Pacific with bulldozers, Seabees, and aviation fuel for places like Guadalcanal, Bougainville, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, the Marianas, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. They are the reason American Marines, soldiers, and airmen in the field get more than enough of everything. If a Liberty ship is sunk, it's a tragedy. Some were hit by U-boats in the Atlantic, some by aircraft or submarines in the Pacific, some by mines. But somewhere in another yard, 2 more ships are already halfway finished. The math favors the Allies. Every Japanese merchantman sunk is irreplaceable. Every Liberty ship sunk is an annoyance. That difference may sound cold, but wars like this are decided precisely by those cold equations. Life aboard an ugly duckling. Let's spend a few minutes inside one of those Liberty ships, just to see what the weapon actually feels like. It's 1943 and you're a young American merchant sailor on your second voyage. You wake up in a cramped bunk, the air thick with the smell of sweat, wet clothes, and coffee that's been sitting on a hot plate too long. The ship rolls gently. You can tell by the motion that you're in open water now. Your boots hit steel deck plates. You pull on a sweater and a jacket. Even in the tropics, the night watch can be cold up on the bridge. In the galley, a cook hands you a tin plate with powdered eggs and a couple of sausages that might not be entirely sure if they're meat. You eat fast. There's a convoy briefing. On the bridge, the captain and the Navy Armed Guard officer, the man responsible for the ship's guns, talk over the route. You're in a convoy of maybe 40 ships. 2 destroyers, a couple of corvettes or escort ships, and perhaps an escort carrier humming in the distance carrying Wildcats or Avengers. Your Liberty ship slides into her assigned position. She doesn't look like much. A boxy hull, a single funnel, derricks and winches cluttering the foredeck. Guns at bow and stern, but deep inside she is packed. Crates of ammunition, stacked floor to ceiling, pallets wrapped in burlap. Vehicles lashed to the deck, barrels of fuel in the holds, because you saw some of it go in. But you have no idea exactly what. You don't need to. Your job is to keep the engine running, to stand watch, to man the guns if something breaks the horizon with a periscope or the glint of glass from a low-flying aircraft. Sometimes the voyage is monotonous. Days of nothing but gray water and gulls. Sometimes it's horror. In the North Atlantic, U-boats can appear out of nowhere. In the Mediterranean, aircraft scream down low between waves. In the Pacific, long-range submarines and aircraft pick off stragglers. But you know one thing. You are not alone. There is a plan. Your ship is part of a system. You might be sunk, but the system will not. That belief, that the machine of supply is bigger than any loss, is a quiet weapon in itself. Japan's convoy's courage without a net now go back to a Japanese freighter. Different ocean, different flag, same steel. But there is no system. There are ad hoc convoys thrown together at the last minute. Escorts that have never trained with their charges. Vague instructions to zigzag and avoid known danger areas that are already out of date. Communications are shaky. Radar, if present at all, is unreliable and often misunderstood. Air cover is thin. Pilots are needed elsewhere for decisive battles. So the merchant fleet sails into the most hostile submarine waters on Earth with little more than hope and routine. The crews are not cowards. They keep going long after any reasonable person would have said, "Enough." They steam through seas where ship after ship has disappeared because they know that if they don't, the men at the front, their own brothers, cousins, classmates, will starve even faster. On some ships, captains order lifeboats kept permanently swung out on their davits. On some, crews sleep in clothes and boots knowing they may have seconds to abandon ship. On all, they light incense before sailing and pray to any kami that might be listening. Steel and courage alone are not enough. Without escorts, without convoys, without a plan to replace losses, they're just sacrifices delayed by distance. Hungry islands. Let's go back to that starting image. The Japanese infantryman in his foxhole. The war on his island doesn't feel like charts and tonnage graphs. It feels like rice rations getting smaller horses and pack animals being slaughtered for food uniforms getting looser letters from home mentioning shortages there too. He maybe landed here with cans of fish, biscuits, decent sake for New Year's. He now eats half-rotten rice boiled with weeds. There is no salt. Sometimes there is no rice. He hears rumors of other garrisons. On one island, they say the quartermasters had to write down what people ate because they were worried how history would judge them. The list included monkeys, dogs, snakes, rats, and then darker things. You can hear similar stories from Axis soldiers in Europe, trapped in Stalingrad or in the Courland pocket. The difference is, in Europe, rails and roads remain open here and there. In the Pacific, when ships stop coming, you are alone. There is no secret mountain road. There is only sea. If the sea is hostile, the future is short. By 1944, thousands of Japanese soldiers are slowly dying on bypassed islands. Not from bullets, from hunger and disease. They are casualties of a war they never see. Submarines they never fire at, mines they never step on, convoys that never appear on their horizon. Operation Starvation, the final twist. As if submarines weren't enough, the United States adds another layer to this invisible strangling in 1945. It's called Operation Starvation, a cheerful name. The idea is simple and brutal. B-29 bombers designed as high-altitude city burners are retasked to fly low over Japanese coastal waters and drop large numbers of naval mines into shipping lanes, harbors, and straits. These aren't dumb spheres of TNT. They can be set to detonate at certain depths. Some can count ships, exploding only after a certain number have passed over to confuse mine sweeping. They sit on the seabed, invisible. Japan, already short of fuel and ships, now has to choose. Sail along the coast and risk mines. Sail farther out and risk submarines. Or don't sail. Mines don't care about courage either, they just wait. An old coal freighter that survived years of war without a scratch might hit 1-2 miles from home and vanish in a column of water. A small tanker carrying the last usable fuel to a naval base might be holed and sunk in minutes. By late 1945, getting a ship from one Japanese port to another is like threading a needle in the dark, blindfolded, while someone occasionally fires a gun in your general direction. Many captains simply refuse. What's the point of risking their crews when everyone knows the war is lost? The flow of goods inside Japan grinds down. Even what hasn't been bombed can't be moved. Liberty ships are still sailing. Japan's ships are afraid even to leave harbor. Life in the shipyards. The war behind the war. We've talked about Liberty ships as if they appear by magic. They don't. Let's go back to one yard. Say the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California. It's 3 in the morning. Floodlights turn night into a kind of harsh twilight over the ways. Men and women pour out of buses and streetcars, lunch pails in hand. Some are experienced shipwrights. Many are not. Teachers, farmers, former waiters, housewives. They learned to weld 6 months ago. Now they're part of a production line building more tonnage than the entire Axis can sink. Riveters hammer, cranes whine, foremen shout. There are posters on the walls. Loose lips might sink this ship. Keep 'em buttoned. Keep 'em rolling, Mom, for victory. In a break room, someone has tacked up a map with pins showing where ships from this yard have gone. Murmansk, Liverpool, Guadalcanal, Saipan, Leyte, Okinawa. Each pin is a line of supply. Each Liberty ship that leaves this yard is a thread in a web spanning the globe. There are accidents, people fall, beams slip, explosions happen, but the overall system works. The United States has married money, manpower, industrial know-how, and cold-blooded planning into something terrifyingly efficient. On the other side of the ocean, in Japanese shipyards, workers are just as dedicated. But they have less steel, less fuel, fewer cranes, fewer tools. By 1944, they often have to pause work not for lack of courage, but for lack of plates and rivets. Even if they finish a ship, they then hand it over to a navy that cannot protect it. Decisions that doomed convoys, it's easy, too easy, come to say, well, Japan lost because they didn't have enough factories. There is some truth there. But decisions matter too. Japanese naval leaders made several choices that in hindsight were disastrous. Underestimating submarines. They saw them as scouts and fleet support, not primary commerce raiders. That bias shaped how seriously they took anti-submarine warfare and how much they invested in defending merchant ships, prioritizing offensive power over escort power destroyers and aircraft that could have guarded convoys were instead kept for fleet actions that never happened or came too late to matter. Delaying convoy systems, Britain had learned in WWI that ships in convoy with escorts are far safer than ships sailing alone. Japan does not fully commit to large, organized convoys until submarines have already wiped out a huge chunk of their fleet. Poor inter-service coordination, the Army and Navy fought over priority for shipping. The Army demanded transports for troops and supplies to China and Southeast Asia. The Navy demanded ships for fuel and ammunition. Each hoarded ships, and there was no unified logistics command that could ruthlessly optimize. Late, weak response to submarine threats, specialized escort ships, better sonar, radar, air patrols. All these things were developed slowly, haltingly, and never in enough numbers. In contrast, American and British planners, having nearly starved in WWI from German U-boats, took the protection of merchant shipping as almost a sacred duty. Convoys, escort carriers, improved sonar, depth charges, long-range aircraft, code breaking. Everything was bent toward one goal: keep the ships moving. Because if the ships move, the armies can move. If the armies can move, the war can be won. Tonnage translated, it can be hard to feel what million tons of shipping lost really means. So let's translate it into something more concrete. A typical 10,000-ton cargo ship can carry around 200-300 tanks or thousands of tons of food, enough to feed a division for weeks or enough aviation fuel to keep an air group flying for a long time, or a mix of trucks, jeeps, artillery pieces, shells, and everything else an army needs. Now imagine one of those ships full to the brim disappearing under the sea. That's a division that doesn't get supplied. That's a factory that runs out of ore. That's an airfield that goes quiet for lack of fuel. Now imagine 9,000 such ships over the course of a war. That's roughly the equivalent of what Japan lost. Even if the numbers wiggle depending on how you count, the scale is mind-breaking. Japan's economy was never designed to absorb that hit. America's was designed to dish it out and survive similar smaller hits itself because it could always build more. Aftermath. Ships as ghosts, the war ends. The guns fall silent. The last torpedoes that were fired and missed coast quietly to the bottoms of empty seas. What's left? If you sail through parts of the Pacific today with sonar, you'll see them. Wrecks, hundreds, thousands. Some upright, some broken in half, some lying on their sides. Japanese freighters, tankers, and troop transports, often still loaded with cars, trucks, even locomotives and rails that never made it to where they were supposed to go. You can see corroded trucks on the seafloor, bales of rubber, barrels, cranes sandwiched under collapsed decks. Each wreck is a frozen moment, a convoy that never arrived. A plan that never happened, a garrison that never got resupplied. On land, old men in Japanese villages remember, "My father went to sea. His ship never came back." They may not know the name of the submarine or whether it was sunk by a mine or a torpedo. They just know there is an empty space in their family. In America, men who served on Liberty ships remember something different. Yeah, we got shot at sometimes, lost some friends, but we kept going. There was always another ship to board. Some Liberty ships kept sailing into the 1960s, 70s, even 80s under new names and flags, hauling civilian cargo in peacetime. They outlived the empire they helped defeat. That's a strange kind of justice. The Silent War, summed up. So what does all this really mean? We like to tell stories of war that end with a big moment. A surrender signing on a battleship deck, a flag raised on a mountain, a city burning under a raid. Those are real, but if you zoom out, you see something else. You see graphs of steel, of oil, of shipping. You see factories, you see shipyards, you see convoys routed and rerouted. You see quietly the accumulation of thousands of decisions about cranes and welding rods and escort deployment. Japan lost the war on the seas long before the last Marine landed on Iwo Jima. It lost it when it chose not to build enough merchant ships, when it chose not to protect them properly, when it chose decisive battle dreams over tedious convoy realities. America won that same war not just with carriers and Marines, but with Liberty ships, long-range submarines, mining campaigns, and a cold determination that no soldier of theirs would go hungry for lack of shipping. For the Japanese infantryman in the foxhole, none of that is visible. He just knows the horizon is empty. He knows the officer's promises about convoys feel thinner every month. He knows the guy next to him is losing weight. He knows in his bones that whatever is killing Japan is not happening on this island. It's happening out there beyond the reef in the dark. In the end, World War II in the Pacific is a tale of two fleets. A fleet of submarines and mines killing quietly from below, and a fleet of ugly, stubborn cargo ships delivering life from above the waterline. Between them sailed Japan's doomed convoys. Brave crews in unprotected hulls, sent into an ocean where the outcome had already been decided in shipyards half a world away. That's the silent war that starved Japan, and that's why, when we talk about the Pacific War, we shouldn't just picture battleships and carriers. We should picture, too, a gray, boxy ship named something like SS John W. Brown or SS Hikawa Maru, plodding across a vast, indifferent sea, carrying the fate of thousands in her holds, and the torpedo wake that decides whether those thousands will live or die.